You're listening to This Week in Cardiology from theheart.org on Medscape.
You can now access the latest in medical news on your Amazon Alexa-enabled device. Join me, Perry Wilson, every weekday morning for Medscape Medical Minute, where I highlight the top medical stories of the day. To add Medscape Medical Minute to your flash briefing, search for Medscape Medical Minute on Amazon and click Enable. Or open the Amazon Alexa app, go to Skills, search for Medscape Medical Minute, and click Enable. Then say, Alexa, what's the news? Or Alexa, what's my flash briefing? I hope you'll join us.
Hi everyone, this is John Mandrola from theheart.org Medscape Cardiology, and this is This Week in Cardiology for January 24th, 2020. This week, executive physicals, coconut fat, leadless pacemakers, endovascular coils, and nurse practitioners and physician assistants care. First, an announcement. Next week, This Week in Cardiology, we'll take a week off. I am in Rome, Italy, for the Four Words Conference. First topic today is executive physicals for heart health. Now, American medicine has many ugly blemishes: the inequity of care, high drug prices, the moral hazards of fee-for-service, but the executive physical offered by prestigious academic medical centers may be one of its ugliest. The executive physical are health screening programs targeted to rich people who are able to pay directly for screening tests that are not generally covered by insurance. Of course, insurance companies don't cover these tests because they have no proven benefit. Publishing in JAMA Internal Medicine, Alan G. and Dr. David Brown from St. Louis set out to assess the cardiovascular exams in these health screening programs offered by top hospitals as ranked by the U.S. News and World Reports. The authors simply called the hospitals to inquire about the different packages for screening. They then compared the test offered with the guideline recommendations for asymptomatic individuals. I love this part of their research letter. Quote, analyses were conducted without statistical software using basic math. They contacted 21 of the 25 top hospitals, and of these, 18 offered executive physicals. And the total cost ranged from $1,000 to $25,000 for a premier executive health program at the Cleveland Clinic. 12 different tests were offered, things like a stress imaging test, vascular screening, coronary artery calcium, C-reactive protein, etc. Of the 12 tests, none are recommended to be applied indiscriminately by ACC, AHA, USPSTF, or the American College of Preventive Medicines. Now, my comments on this: you can be an advocate for liberty and still stand against the nonsense of these executive physicals. Medicine is special because we have an oath to act in our patient's best interest and to first do no harm. The authors point out that there is no evidence that these screening programs provide any benefit. So given the well-known harms of cascade testing, on net, it is likely that these indiscriminate screening tests lead to clinical iatrogenesis, say a complication from an unnecessary cath. Now, direct clinical iatrogenesis, however, isn't the worst aspect of these executive physicals. Worse is that these hospitals are teaching institutions, and the message sent to learners is that it's okay to do non-beneficial testing to people willing to pay. This is offensive, and it gives fodder to the critics of medicine. Now, speaking of critics, in 1906, in the preface to his play The Doctor's Dilemma, George Bernard Shaw offered perhaps one of the most stinging critiques of medicine. Shaw compared doctors to tradesmen and shopkeepers who have a pecuniary interest in people being ill. He wrote, quote, once in the commerce of healing, they, the doctors, turn into the grossest of impostors, as abject dependence on his patient forces him to flatter every fashionable fad and practice every fashionable quackery. Yep, I'd say that Shaw's words were pretty good at capturing the essence of these executive physicals. Now, in addition to the direct harm of cascades and the atrocious message sent to learners, the other bad aspect of these programs is the message it sends to society. The late Czech polymath Ivan Illich coined the term social iatrogenesis. Social iatrogenesis is the medicalization of life and sponsoring of sickness so as to create unrealistic health demands. Executive physicals say to society, you all are potentially sick, and if you're wealthy enough to pay for these tests, you can be saved. This story leads the podcast because I care about maintaining medicine's good name. Part of instilling trust in the beneficence of our profession is calling out our wrongs. And so I laud JAMA Internal Medicine and the authors of this paper for exposing a shameful practice that ought to be stopped. The second topic today is coconut oil. Marketing works. Based on surveys of American consumers, proponents of the coconut industry have largely convinced people that the saturated fat coconut oil is a natural, healthful product that may reduce inflammation, improve glucose numbers, and reduce body fatness. Proponents of eating coconut oil also point to the lack of cardiovascular disease in two populations of people living on Pacific Islands who consume large quantities of coconut. The journal Circulation recently published a meta-analysis of 16 trials comparing coconut oil to non-tropical oils, and this meta-analysis disputes these claims. Now, the first point to make, and one that I learned from reading on this topic, is that coconut oil is not really a medium-chain fatty acid. Medium-chain fatty acids are rapidly absorbed by the portal vein. Lauric acid, which comprises about half of the fatty acid content of coconut oil, is chemically classified as a medium-chain fatty acid, but biologically it is largely absorbed and transported by chylomicrons, similar to long-chain fatty acids. What's more, another quarter of the content of coconut fat comes from the long-chain saturated fatty acids. Now, the current meta-analysis found that consumption of coconut oil compared with non-tropical oils significantly increased total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and HDL cholesterol. The point estimate for the increase in LDL-C was 11 milligrams per deciliter with a range of 6 to 35, while the rise in HDL-C was about 4 milligrams per deciliter. The study found that coconut oil had no significant effect on body weight, waist circumference, percentage body fat, C-reactive protein, or fasting glucose as compared with non-tropical vegetable oils. Now, the authors of the meta-analysis and the editorialist spend many words explaining the dangers of raising LDL cholesterol. The notion is that the small rise of HDL cholesterol with the coconut oil does not offset the large rise in LDL. Now, I'm no expert on nutrition. I have to be careful here, but remember, one of the main criticisms of the Improve It trial, that was the recent RCT showing dramatic reductions in cardiovascular outcomes with the fish oil supplement icosapent ethyl, was that the placebo arm use of mineral oil in that trial caused a small rise in LDL cholesterol. Thus, it's possible that the fish oil tablet did better because the placebo did worse. I also realized that LDL cholesterol is only one factor leading to heart disease. That said, this meta-analysis surely makes you wonder about the wisdom of calling a substance that increases the LDL by that much healthful. Of course, the meta-analysis and its included studies measure surrogate markers. Ultimately, we would need data on cardiovascular outcomes to really understand any benefits or harms of coconut oil. As it is in most of nutrition, occasional intake of a substance like coconut oil will likely bring no harm, but using it in large quantities as a health intervention seems dubious. Third topic today is leadless pacing. Medtronic announced this week that FDA approved a new and potentially useful iteration to their leadless pacemaker. Briefly, leadless pacemakers are small devices, think 2 large vitamin tablets stacked end to end, that go into the right ventricle deployed from the leg vein. Once deployed, the device's tines grab the RV myocardium, and the device performs single-chamber, rate-responsive ventricular pacing. It's a really cool device for selected patients, say those who do not require AV synchrony, patients with permanent AFib who have heart block. Now, the patient comes out of the laboratory with no incision. There's no worries about lead problems in the veins. We've also used leadless pacemakers for patients who have had their tricuspid valve replaced for endocarditis. The advantage in these cases is that you don't have a lead going through the bioprosthetic leaflets, and also there may be less chance of infection of the smaller device. But a core problem with leadless pacemakers is that they've only provided single chamber pacing. If a patient has sinus rhythm and you pace the ventricle only, some of these patients will develop pacemaker syndrome due to the dyssynchrony between the A and the V. This new iteration of the leadless pacemaker improves AV synchrony through a really nifty engineering algorithm. Get this. While in the right ventricle, the device uses signal components from its accelerometer that correspond to passive ventricular filling, which is the A3 component, and atrial contraction, A4, to provide AV synchronous pacing. Now, engineers are pretty cool sometimes. This algorithm was tested in a small study of 75 patients from 12 centers. The patients tested had sinus rhythm and complete AV block. Jack EP published this series, and it was called the Marvel 2 study. And the mean percentage of AV synchrony increased from 27% during VVI pacing to 89% during VDD pacing. VDD is sensed in the atrium but paced only in the ventricle. Now, while this will decrease the number of patients excluded from leadless pacing, VDD pacing has been available for decades but has never taken off. That is because without a lead in the atrium, you cannot pace the atrium. So if a patient has sinus node dysfunction, they will not have AV synchrony at low rates. The other question is how much of a premium Medtronic will charge for this new device. If it is a lot, there'll be slow uptake, as some insurers still consider leadless pacing experimental. Hospitals have become extremely cost-conscious. The final issue is it was only a small study of 75 patients showing that this algorithm works. I will likely be a slow adopter of this device. Fourth topic today is endovascular coils to close left atrial appendage device leaks. The group at Texas Cardiac Arrhythmia Institute in Austin have published a report in JACC Interventions showing a novel technique for closing residual leaks after left atrial appendage occlusion. Now, the idea of closing the left atrial appendage either percutaneously with a plug, like say Watchman, or epicardially with a lariat, is that doing so will prevent clot forming or escaping from the left atrial appendage. This idea is totally plausible. Unfortunately, the pivotal trials showed that patients who had Watchman had twofold more ischemic strokes than those who took warfarin. One of the many reasons why left atrial appendage occlusion doesn't prevent ischemic strokes is that it's hard to close the appendage. The appendage has highly variable anatomy. Residual leaks are not uncommon. And the problem with residual leaks is that you can make the appendage even more thrombogenic if you do a partial closure. The report of using endovascular coils to close residual leaks in 28 of 30 patients shows two major things. First, it shows that the group in Austin have extreme talent. I've visited their lab. They are good with catheters. The far greater message is what happens when we adopt dubious strategies. Studies like this normalize a procedure that has no evidence that it works. To wit, if JACC is publishing stories about fixing residual leaks of left atrial appendage occlusion, then left atrial appendage occlusion must be okay. Wrong. An editorialist from a prominent institution led with this sentence, quote, "Left atrial appendage occlusion is an effective strategy to address the unmet need of stroke prevention in patients with AFib who are not suitable for lifelong anticoagulation." No, it is not. It might be a reasonably effective strategy, but patients not suitable for anticoagulation were not included in the trials. And if you are a Bayesian, given the results of these trials, the prior evidence that this device will work in sicker patients with contraindications to anticoagulation is highly skeptical. Another sentence from the editorialist, quote, "The authors are to be congratulated for elegantly describing a novel approach to a challenging problem." He does not at all acknowledge the fact that cardiologists created the problem of residual leaks by doing this procedure in the first place. There would be no need for heroic coil placement. Note 2 of 30 patients in this study had cardiac perforation requiring another procedure. So for these 2 patients, that is a total of 3 preventive procedures. The folly of fixing man-made problems reminds me of a patient I almost killed with an antiarrhythmic drug. I had to do an emergency pacemaker for Torsade de Pont. It was a harrowing experience. The patient still thinks I saved her life. Yes, that is true, but only because I nearly caused her death. To my younger listeners, please, innovation is a good thing, but be skeptical, especially with procedures done to prevent something that may or may not happen in the future. Do you know the number of patients a medical conservative has had to refer for placement of a second foreign body in the heart? The answer is 0. Final topic today is, should nurse practitioners and physician's assistants be able to practice medicine independently? An announcement from the Practicing Physicians of America noted that an executive order from the White House has a provision that nurse practitioners and physician's assistants may practice independently. This is a provocative concept because for a century or more, only doctors practiced medicine. This era is over. Many doctors think it is going to be like Armageddon. How can an NP or PA practice on their own? Their training is far shorter than ours. Well, I have written a column on this topic, and it's up on the heart.org Medscape Cardiology now. The short summary is this. Whether or not that executive order gets passed, it is only a matter of time before NPs, PAs, CRNAs, and possibly pharmacists begin to practice medicine independently. I too used to be in the camp that thought it would lead to patient harm, but I have changed my mind. Times have changed. The evidence is compelling. In the column, I make the case that NP or PA care will not lead to harm, and that has great implications on our medical education, which is way too long. As always, I may be wrong on this point, so I hope you read the column and take the time to make a comment. So that's it for this week in cardiology. Again, I'm grateful that you listened. Thank you. And remember, if you like this podcast, please tell a friend, go and subscribe, give us a review on whatever app you use to listen to this. It really helps other people find us. And I'll see you again in 2 weeks' time. This is John Mandrola from the heart.org Medscape Cardiology.
You're listening to This Week in Cardiology from the heart.org on Medscape.